something curious is happening in the Western anime market. Namely, Crunchyroll seems to be in the process of attempting to forge its own Standard Oil-esque monopoly over the Western anime and manga market. Most recently, it was announced in September of 2023 that Crunchyroll would be acquiring Right Stuf, one of the oldest distributors of anime and manga paraphernalia in North America, shutting down their storefront and merging it into the Crunchyroll store. The merger came roughly a year and a half after arguably the biggest shock to the Western anime streaming ecosystem, namely that Crunchyroll and Funimation, the two biggest anime streaming platforms and the licensors of anime, would be merged into one. Of course, this was not an especially surprising announcement. If anything, it was inevitable after Sony, which acquired Funimation in 2017, also acquired Crunchyroll from AT&T in 2021. The writing on the wall here is evident. Crunchyroll, and by extension its parent company in Sony, is attempting to monopolize the Western anime market from video streaming to physical sales of anime-related goods to even the publishing of anime-style mobile gacha games. This is not particularly surprising from a business standpoint. The popularity of anime and manga outside of Japan has exploded in recent years, a phenomenon I documented in my previous award-winning video on the manga section of Barnes & Noble, so it makes good business sense for them to double down on this growing market. Not to be hyperbolic or anything, but the idea of Crunchyroll horizontally integrating the Western anime market like some kind of nightmarish weeaboo Disney frankly scares me shitless as a consumer. One of the bedrock principles of economics is that competition between firms is good for consumers. In a market where consumers have choices between relatively similar goods and services, firms must compete to differentiate themselves. They might strive to provide superior customer service, higher quality goods, or lower prices. The entire reason why monopolies are bad is because once an entire market for a good or service has been cornered by one firm, they can now engage in anti-consumer practices like raising prices or reducing quality. Crunchyroll is a textbook example of how lack of meaningful competition leads to a lower quality product. For its entire existence, at least until it was transformed to solely hosting legal content in 2009, Crunchyroll has been the premier online platform for watching anime legally. As a side note, the moralism from some Crunchyroll defenders about supporting the industry is rather amusing for a company that got off the ground by quite literally stealing unlicensed fan subs from people and profiting off of them, but that is neither here nor there. Since Crunchyroll has effectively always been the go-to platform for international anime fans looking to watch anime legally, they've never really had any meaningful competition in this space. There have been a couple of half-baked attempts at launching competitors like High Dive or Anime Strike, but they've all had extremely limited success. I don't think it's a coincidence that Crunchyroll has essentially always reigned as a near monopoly on the Western online anime streaming market, and that the service has long been plagued by complaints about antiquated technology and a general lack of innovation and quality. For a few examples of what I mean by this, Crunchyroll didn't roll out a skip intro button until 2022, something Netflix has had since 2017. This is especially frustrating when you consider that the openings of most Western TV shows are like 30 seconds, compared to the minute 30 for most anime. For whatever reason, Crunchyroll used to categorize every language a show was dubbed into as a separate season. Crunchyroll's UI UX is frankly so bad that I could probably find college students that could design you a better website. The fact that pirate websites have UIs that are leagues better than Crunchyroll makes you seriously wonder what on earth Crunchyroll's engineers and designers are doing. And these are just the complaints for the core video streaming service. The situation is way worse for their other business lines. On the subject of atrocious web design, Crunchyroll's web-based manga reader still relied on Adobe Flash all the way until 2020, the same year that Flash was completely discontinued. It also apparently had security so bad that one of my college roommates was easily able to read the manga without a subscription. Not that there was much worth reading anyhow. Crunchyroll Games, the division that publishes mobile gacha games, has basically become a joke among gacha game players for their uncanny ability to run games into the ground. We have no better example than their absolute boondoggle that was the handling of Princess Connect. Crunchyroll Games and Amazon Game Studios are probably in a race to the bottom for the company you least want to see license your favorite video game. Right Stuff was one of the oldest fixtures of the North American anime fandom, dating all the way back to the dinosaur times when buying physical media was your only way to watch anime. The company was generally well liked for their pricing, customer service, and packaging. Crunchyroll Store, on the other hand, not so much. The Crunchyroll Store has been derided as something of a joke among collectors of physical anime merchandise for their awful customer service, shipping times, and packaging. As much as I hate Crunchyroll, the veritable middle finger that streaming companies have been delivering to consumers for years is a problem that isn't just limited to Crunchyroll. It's a problem that's been increasingly plaguing the entire streaming market for years. I want to use this video not merely to air my distaste for Crunchyroll, but also as a general lament for how the online video streaming marketplace has evolved. This is going to involve a fairly deep dive into the history and business practice of the streaming video on demand industry writ large, so strap in, I guess. Once upon a time, if you wanted to watch a TV show or movie, you had essentially one of three options. You could A, watch it while it aired live or in a movie theater. B, in the case of TV, you could record it to watch later. Or C, you could rent a physical copy to watch on VHS or DVD from a physical store like Blockbuster. Out of these three options, while movie theaters and live TV still exist, renting physical media has gone the way of the dodo bird. At its peak in 2004, Blockbuster operated over 9,000 stores and employed over 80,000 people. Only 6 years later, the company would declare bankruptcy and effectively cease to exist by the mid-2010s. Nowadays, only a single Blockbuster location remains in operation in Bend, Oregon. As you're probably aware, the decline of Blockbuster and physical media in general was a direct result of streaming, or what they call in the industry streaming video on demand, or SVOD, that was pioneered by Netflix. Founded in 1997 by Reed Hastings and Mark Randolph, Netflix was originally a mail-order DVD rental business, a business line they continued all the way into 2023. Unlike Blockbuster, which forced you to drive to a physical location and would smack you with a $40 late fee if you forgot to return your movie, Netflix instead offered a convenient service where for a fixed monthly cost, you could make a list of movies you wanted to watch online. Netflix would then mail you a DVD at no additional cost. You could then keep that DVD for as long as you wanted, and once you were finished, you slotted it back into the included return envelope, and Netflix would then mail you the next movie on your list. No late fees, no leaving the house. As such, you could just watch as much as you wanted for $20. Eventually, Blockbuster got wise to how Netflix's mail order business was eating their lunch. In 2004, Blockbuster launched Blockbuster Online, a DVD subscription service that was quite similar to Netflix. By the end of 2006, Blockbuster Online had grown to 2 million subscribers. That same year, Blockbuster introduced an additional service that allowed subscribers to return DVDs to a physical Blockbuster location and check out a new one for free. This competition was a huge problem for Netflix, which started to see subscriber growth come under major pressure in 2007 as a direct result of this competition from Blockbuster. The company simply did not have the resources to go head-to-head with the 800-pound gorilla in Blockbuster. Faced with this new competitive reality, Hastings and Randolph realized that they would have to change Netflix's business model to differentiate it from Blockbuster. While Netflix had long envisioned the possibility of directly providing content to consumers via the internet, It was only in the mid-2000s that consumer internet speeds had finally reached the point where doing so had become technologically viable. Originally, the focus at Netflix was delivering movies in the highest quality possible. As such, the initial idea for internet distribution was to provide some kind of physical peripheral that would download movies overnight for users to watch. However, at around the same time, YouTube burst into the scene in 2005. The rapid success of a platform limited to 480p convinced Netflix to change course, scrapping their plan for a physical movie downloading peripheral and instead retooling it into an online video on demand streaming service. YouTube's success demonstrated to Netflix that users were perhaps not as invested as watching video in the highest quality possible and instead preferred the convenience of being able to instantly watch whatever content they wanted. Of course, you are probably familiar with how this story plays out. It turned out this pivot to online streaming would prove highly fortuitous for Netflix, skyrocketing the company from a tech startup to one of the largest and most profitable businesses in America. As of writing, Netflix is currently the 30th largest publicly traded company in the US by market cap. On the other hand, Blockbuster does not exist. During its initial growth trajectory in the 2010s, Netflix forged deals with legacy media license holders like Disney, NBC Universal, Warner Bros. Discovery, and Sony Pictures to provide their movies and TV shows on the platform. The mid-2010s was, in many ways, a kind of golden age for streaming and for customers. Netflix essentially functioned as the one-stop shop for a huge catalog of some of the most popular and well-known TV shows and movies. You could watch much of the entire Disney catalog alongside hit sitcoms like Friends, Seinfeld, The Office, or Parks and Recreation. At one point, Friends and The Office alone accounted for over 10% of all of the views on Netflix. At some point, all of these legacy license holders realized that they were basically being swindled by Netflix. They were more or less being paid pennies on the dollar to provide their content to Netflix, while the company grew its user base parabolically off the backs of their content. As such, towards the end of the 2010s, we start to see this huge explosion of new streaming service come into the landscape, many of which are backed by legacy media giants who once partnered with Netflix. Disney removed all of their content to create their own service in Disney+. NBC pulled The Office and Parks and Rec to form Peacock, Paramount formed Paramount+, Warner Bros. Discovery rebranded HBO Now into HBO Max, and finally just into Max, a transition I still don't fully understand. The streaming landscape has turned into such an absolute clown show that none other than a video game donkey made a video detailing the ridiculousness of how fragmented and siloed the industry has become.
There's a website that tells you how to watch this. You start off on Netflix, then swap over to the Pokemon streaming service, which is the only place that has season 2, then swap over to Prime Video for seasons 3 through 5, swap to Freevee, then Hoopla. Season 13 is only on Amazon though, then swap to Tubi, then Hulu, then Roku channel, and then finally back to the Pokemon streaming and then Netflix. Easy.
In retrospect, this development isn't particularly surprising and was probably inevitable. Investors love software-based businesses like Netflix for a couple of reasons. First, the marginal cost of providing a streaming service to each additional customer is virtually zero. Compared to the sale of physical products, software businesses have essentially zero marginal cost for each unit they sell. No matter how much you streamline your production and capitalize on economies of scale, each box of cereal or pair of shoes is going to have a much higher marginal cost than the penny's worth of bandwidth and server space required to accommodate each additional Netflix subscriber. As a result, the net profit margin for a business like Netflix is upwards of 15%, while a traditional retailer like Walmart has a net profit margin much more in the ballpark of 3%. Second, have you ever wondered why it seems like literally everyone is trying to sell you a subscription these days? Well, it's because subscription models provide highly consistent, predictable, recurring cash flows. Especially in the media business, which can be extremely cyclical and boom and bust based on how well different movies and TV shows perform, having a consistent cash flow from a subscription service to buttress their revenue is highly appealing to corporate bigwigs and investors. It's not exactly a surprise then that Disney, NBC, Warner Bros. Discovery, Paramount, etc. all looked at the massive success of Netflix and thought that, hey, they could do it too. Even YouTube tried to get into the game with YouTube Red. Remember when they made that Karate Kid reboot? After all, at the end of the day, how hard could making a new streaming service be? This wasn't some unknown frontier, it was a well-established business model at that point. As it turned out, the answer was that getting a new streaming service off the ground wasn't that easy, even if you had powerhouse media licenses to work with. While the launch of Disney Plus was initially met with much excitement from investors in 2020, it quickly became clear that the service was not generating the user growth and revenues that Disney had originally promised. Instead, the service had become a veritable financial nightmare, marred by cost overruns, inefficiencies, and underperformance. After reaching a peak in 2021, Disney stock has sunk to its lowest point in 10 years. AT&T, the telecom giant that originally owned Warner Media and by extension HBO Max, must have realized that their entertainment division was ailing, so they spun off Warner Media with Discovery and stuck investors with a steaming turd of a company that has lost over 50% of its stock price since its spin-off was finalized in April of 2022. It wasn't even just the new players that were getting burned by this increasingly crowded streaming market. In 2022, for the first time since introducing their streaming service, Netflix reported that their subscriber numbers had actually started to decline, a trend that continued into the second quarter of 2022. This news completely shattered investor confidence in the company, sending the stock price free falling down 70% from all-time highs in just the first half of 2022. It wasn't uncommon to hear commentary from investors and industry analysts at the time that Netflix's business model was, at best, under serious threat and, at worst, completely doomed. In order to combat declining subscriber numbers, rather than investing in improvements to the service or trying to shore up profitability by not doing things like pissing away money on Netflix originals no one likes, Netflix instead decided to try and nickel and dime its customers to reinvigorate growth. The company first started by cracking down on password sharing, restricting the number of households that could use the same Netflix account. Furthermore, they abandoned founder Reed Hastings' long-standing commitment to never introduce ads, creating a cheaper ad-supported tier while bumping the price of the old subscription tier most users were used to. This turn of events never ceases to amuse me, considering that as recently as their 2019 earnings call, Hastings derided advertising as, quote, exploiting users. Both of these practices are objectively anti-consumer. Netflix is making their service more expensive and worse for users while not providing anything in return. In the short term at least, Netflix's finagling to boost subscribership has worked. After a rocky 2022, subscriber growth has started to trend in the right direction, largely driven by improvements in international markets, and the stock price has largely recovered since those 2022 lows. In most industries, competition is good for consumers. It provides customers with more options and forces all of the players to improve their service quality and prices to stand out from one another. Netflix's arrival on the mail-order DVD scene forced Blockbuster to scrap its late fees and introduce a mail-order business of their own. The arrival of new fast casual dining establishments like Chipotle, Panera, or Cava has forced legacy fast food chains to revitalize their menus. The resurgence of AMD has forced Intel to invest serious money into capital improvements in order to stay competitive in the chips business. However, the problem with this new streaming landscape is that it hasn't led to better quality service or even particularly better content. Rather, it's just led to a horrid anti-consumer nightmare. If I want to watch all the parts of one media franchise, I shouldn't need to subscribe to 4 different streaming services just to make that a reality. The problem is that the market for video streaming is what economists refer to as monopolistic competition. In monopolistic competition, unlike perfect competition, the goods and services being provided are not perfect substitutes. Watching Better Call Saul on Netflix is not a perfect substitute for watching The Office on Peacock. Watching the live-action One Piece on Netflix is not a perfect substitute for watching the actual One Piece anime on Crunchyroll. As such, the way that streaming services compete with each other is not really by offering better service or pricing, but by trying to gobble up as many exclusive licenses as possible to force people to subscribe to their service to stay in the zeitgeist. On the other hand, there's a certain case to be made that consolidation and monopoly, or at least an oligopoly, within the streaming industry was better for consumers. It was certainly way better back in the day when you could pay $10 a month for Netflix and basically have access to almost all of the most popular TV shows and movies instead of the absolute clown car the media market has devolved into. Indeed, this is probably why a lot of anime fans cheered the collapse of Anime Strike. There is some case to be made that it's preferable for Crunchyroll to have a near monopoly on the anime industry, so people don't have to subscribe to like 5 different services just to watch the anime they want. On the other hand, Crunchyroll is just an awful company. Their technology is chronically years behind other streaming services like Netflix, and they have demonstrated that they frankly do not give a shit about making improvements to their service. After all, why would they? There's no other place for anime fans to go if they want to watch anime legally. Crunchyroll could be essentially as terrible as it wants as long as they deliver some minimal viable product. This isn't even to mention the absolute disaster area that is their other business lines, like the game publishing arm or the Crunchyroll store. Of course, the specter that always looms over these discussions of online media is piracy. To be honest, I have never paid for Crunchyroll, or any streaming video on demand service for that matter, and as a matter of principle, I never will. I don't want to give my money to these companies and implicitly validate these horrid anti-consumer business models. Frankly, I don't personally know anyone in my life who plays for Crunchyroll. After all, why would you, when piracy provides an equivalent if not superior service? I can go on Yacht.si and torrent basically every anime in existence and watch it at a superior quality, often with better subtitles and translation than what Crunchyroll offers. Or I can go to a certain purple website that has a UI that is somehow leagues better than the one offered by the multi-million-dollar company. Inevitably, that one Gabe Newell quote always comes up when the topic of internet piracy is discussed. You know the one. The one that goes, piracy is almost always a service problem and not a pricing problem. There is basically no better example of this than the music industry. For those of you who are too young or literally weren't alive yet, during the early 2000s, there was this huge stir in the music industry about the rampant growth of music piracy via new computer applications like Napster or LimeWire. The music industry responded by attempting to shut down these fledgling P2P music services by smacking them with lawsuits. Napster was ordered shut after a successful music industry lawsuit less than 2 years after the service began operations. Yet, isn't it curious how pretty much no one in the developed world pirates music anymore? At least for those of you living in developed countries, do you personally know anyone who still pirates music? Nowadays, everyone just pays for Spotify or YouTube Music or something. It turns out that if you offer someone the choice between being able to stream almost any song they want for like $11 a month and having to go through the chore of downloading new music all the time, most people will just opt for forking over the trivial amount of money. Even before the advent of music streaming services, competition from digital piracy forced the music industry to change their business model for the better. Rather than forcing consumers to fork over $20 for an album containing like 10 songs, the advent of iTunes in 2001 allowed consumers to buy music in a much more convenient and cost-effective way. In effect, competition from digital piracy forced the music industry to reevaluate their business practices and begin to meet consumers where they were. It seems to me at least that the inevitable result of the current streaming market will be a rise in internet piracy. Streaming services have become less convenient and more expensive for some time now. In an attempt to follow Netflix's steps, the other major streaming services are also implementing their own crackdowns on password sharing and raising prices to increase profitability, all of course at the expense of consumers. The promise of online streaming was that it would create an easier, more consumer-friendly way to access media compared to the old days of renting or paying for cable. Yet, we're seemingly regressing backwards to the point where it's sometimes easier to physically acquire all parts of a media franchise than it is to attempt to watch it all legally online. At the end of the day, if your only moat as a business is controlling access to exclusive media licenses, piracy is an existential threat to your business. There's a reason that Game of Thrones remains the most pirated TV show in history. People would rather just get the one show they want to watch for free than fork over money for an HBO subscription that they'll never use once they finish Game of Thrones. In the anime context, this is even easier. Torrent aggregators like Nyad.si have basically every show in existence. If you don't want to download, there's no shortage of illegal websites that will allow you to watch almost any anime you want. Whereas Western media licensors tend to be fairly aggressive about defending their copyrights, Japanese license holders have historically been quite lax about ending overseas piracy of anime, largely because the business model of anime has historically revolved around domestic sales of physical media and merchandise related to anime series. This is a serious question I've been pondering for quite a while, namely how exactly to create a streaming platform that actually provides meaningful value to the consumer besides just gatekeeping access to restricted media licenses. I want to give people a streaming service that provides value just beyond moral grandstanding about supporting the industry, and maybe some niche cases for people who want to stream via a game console or streaming box that can't as easily support piracy. For example, in the case of music streaming, Spotify not only allows you to just access all the music you could want without having to fiddle with downloading new songs, it also helps you generate playlists and discover new music, giving the service a tangible value proposition over piracy. To be frank, I have yet to figure out how to replicate such a thing with video streaming. I'm sure there must be some way to create value for the end users, but I just haven't thought of it yet. Even still, if I could suddenly convince Sequoia Capital to just give me a bunch of seed money to make a meaningful competitor to Crunchyroll, I would more than love to. At the very least, I'd employ competent engineers and designers to make a service that at least compares to Netflix in basic technical competency. The fact that international anime fans are stuck with Crunchyroll as their only option to legally stream anime is a travesty. We deserve better as consumers. We deserve more than a company that pisses away subscription revenues on ridiculous projects like High Spice Guardian and failing to manage popular gacha games. Am I at all confident that we will get this better option? No, not really. But maybe, just maybe, if everyone subscribes, one day I'll be rich enough and I will make that halfway decent competitor to Crunchyroll into a reality.